Good morning, friends. I'll start with the morning information report of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Kiev regime. It is reported that fighting is already underway in the area of the city of Slavyansk and continues near the settlements of Popasno and Kurikovo. The enemy grouping around Severodonetsk is being strengthened, but nothing is said about a missile attack on the Moskva cruiser. However, the Russian Ministry of Defense confirms that ammunition detonated on the cruiser. The crew was evacuated. The cruiser Moskva no longer exists as a combat unit of the fleet. It is useless to say that he was hit by some Neptune missiles, which is extremely doubtful, especially since the Russian General Staff is silent about this, or the cruiser ran into a floating mine, or even had some kind of own problems, resulting in the detonation of ammunition. You can guess endlessly, especially since now we will not know the truth in any case. And this is not so important. More important is the very fact that the cruiser has already been destroyed. This is a full-fledged war in which it is necessary to take all available forces and means to achieve the final result, because the endless prolongation of the war will inevitably cause heavy losses because our enemy will receive more and more help. Right now, for example, a border crossing called Three Sisters was fired upon by the armed forces of the Kiev regime. And this is the only border crossing through which citizens of Ukraine can get from Belarus to Russia by land route. The fact is that the laws of peacetime also continue to operate here. And if there is a free border between Belarusians and Ukraine, but since it is free only for citizens of Russia and Belarus, the EU countries, then for citizens of Ukraine, the land route can only go through the Three Sisters crossing. I encountered this back in 2019, and since the crossing is now shelled, it means that people will not go through it or will be afraid. This means that now Ukrainians from Belarus can get to Russia only through the airport. All other border crossings, including railway ones, are closed to Ukrainian citizens. Next news. Zelensky said that Russia will either go to negotiations in order to finish war or disappear forever from the world stage. Such a statement rather indicates that he was afraid that a mass exodus and surrender of the armed forces of the Kiev regime would begin after such an example was set yesterday by the sailors of the 36th Ukrainian Brigade. This will indeed happen, but only after the start of a big offensive, when it smells of fried. According to the Times, Russia is gathering forces in the Donbas, the number of which should exceed the Ukrainian grouping of troops in the east by a ratio of 5-1. I don't know why they are escalating the situation, because if there are about 100,000 troops of the Kiev regime, then Russia should concentrate a 500,000 group there, which is completely unrealistic. Well, if we admit that from Russia there will be order 200,000 troops of the United Allied Forces, including the republics of Donbas, well then we are talking about the fact that in the Donbas there are no more than 40,000 Ukrainian grouping, which is clearly not corresponds to reality. The British Mi-6 intelligence also transmitted intelligence to Zelensky's office and the General Staff that the Russian army was preparing to use heavy bombers. This, in my opinion, is a completely logical assumption and you don't need to be a scout for this. In the meantime, preparations are underway for the second stage of the war, which will radically change the use of military tactics by Russia. We have been talking about changing tactics for a month now. And the cruiser Moscow, which retired from the fleet, confirms this once again. And this is also forced by Biden's decision to start deliveries of heavy weapons to the Kiev regime. The next $800 million shipment will include heavy artillery and helicopters. Well, that's exactly what we've been talking about. Here's what we talked about yesterday. Rostislav Lomtev, deputy commander of the 36th Brigade for Educational Work, repeated the situation. The first time he was captured by the armed forces of Russia in 2014. He was exchanged, and now he is fighting again. This is clear evidence that prisoners can be returned only as a result of an exchange, and only one for one. And Britain is growing dissatisfied with the policies of Prime Minister Johnson. Quote, "We're fed up with two-faced thugs." This is the work of British cartoonist Beau Moran. Well, the governor of Kursk, Roman Starovoyt, confirmed the shelling of a border checkpoint in the Kalinin region from small arms. And the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that if strikes on Russian territory continue, the Russian armed forces will strike back at decision-making centers, including Kyiv. This is an unequivocal warning to strike at administrative buildings where the Kyiv regime operates. India plans to increase deliveries of its own goods to Russia by $2 billion. This decision was made after negotiations between the Americans and the Indian Prime Minister. It answers the question. Will India submit to the United States? No, it won't obey. It will make compromises but will continue its own policy and will not refuse trade with Russia. And for other news. Most of the arrests for prostitution in Sweden were related to Ukrainian women, writes the British Daily Mail. A Swedish police operation was carried out, during which 38 men who visited prostitutes were detained. It turned out that 30 of them visited Ukrainian women and paid for sex with them. The funny thing is that most of them turned out to be refugees. And the television news service of Ukraine spoke about a soldier of the armed forces of Ukraine who was captured by the Russians, was shot, after which he survived. For 2 days he made his way through secret paths, got out, ended up in the hospital, where they found that a bullet hit him in the heart. The bullet was removed, and after a couple of days he got back on his feet and now tells about his terrible story. Many even believe. And in Romania, a student decided to dry his towel in the window. As a result, the police raided him because there they saw the letter Z. You see the full photo of the towel. It's still just like a stall for a horse. However, now the student is in trouble with the police. And the latest news. Condom manufacturers Durax and Contex are leaving Russia. I understand that they are fighting to increase the birth rate in the country. On this, all the best to you and goodbye.